At my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law ordered me to hand over the keys to my farm in front of. Our family vineyard holds more memories than grapes. I always thought my daughter, Clara, understood that. But her husband, Marcus, he only saw dollar signs where I saw my soul. At their wedding, in front of 200 guests, Marcus raised his glass for a toast, and then demanded that I hand over the keys to my vineyard as a gift. When I refused, he slapped me. The sound of his hand striking my face silenced the entire room. I didn't shout. I didn't fight back. I simply straightened my jacket, met my daughter's shocked eyes, and walked out. That night, I didn't call the police. Instead, I unlocked the oak box my late wife, Isabel, had left for me. Inside was a key, a USB drive, and a phone number, one she told me to use only if the worst ever happened. I made the call. Marcus thought I was just an old farmer. He saw my soil-stained hands as weakness. But to understand what Isabel left me, you need to know the war that began the night before the wedding. It started at the rehearsal dinner. The restaurant sat on the edge of Seneca Lake, glowing with warm lights and polished silver. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Clara was radiant, her eyes full of love for the man beside her. But I saw him for what he really was. Marcus Thorne wasn't a son-in-law. He was a salesman, trying to sell me a future that required bulldozing my past. He dominated the table conversation, his voice smooth as the expensive wine he kept pouring. He spoke of asset diversification and market trends, words that didn't belong in the clean air of the Finger Lakes. Then he turned to me, leaning forward like he was letting me in on a secret. Sam, with this lakefront access, Isabel's vineyard could be a $10 million resort, he said. We're talking about a real legacy. The guests nodded approvingly. They heard legacy and thought of something lasting. I heard it and knew he meant something disposable. As he painted his grand vision of infinity pools and glass hotels, my mind drifted back to the day Isabel and I planted our first vine. Hands in the rich soil, hearts full of hope. That was a legacy. I smiled politely. Some things aren't measured in dollars, I said quietly. Clara touched his arm gently. Honey, let's just enjoy tonight, she said. She was a good daughter, but blinded by his charm. She saw ambition. I saw greed. Marcus had been circling my farm for months, calling it an underperforming asset. To him, the vineyard where Isabel and I built our life was just acreage. To me, it was sacred ground. Even the soil held memories. Our old dog Buster buried by the oak tree, Isabel's laughter carried by the wind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the vineyard under the silver moonlight, the vines standing like silent soldiers guarding a promise. At the edge of the property stood the oldest vine, where Isabel and I had carved our initials 30 years ago. I ran my hand over the weathered wood and could almost hear her voice again. This land is our soul, Sam. It'll care for our family, but only if we care for it. Don't ever let anyone turn it into a number. Her words lingered in the cool air. That was the night I promised her again. I'd never let anyone destroy what we built. The morning of the wedding arrived with a cloudless sky that felt like a lie. I was fixing my bow tie when Marcus knocked on my door. He entered already dressed in his tuxedo, carrying not a gift, but a portfolio. I have a wedding present, he said, laying it on the dresser. And you're the only one who can give it to us. Inside was a glossy proposal titled The Thorne Estates and Winery at Seneca Lake. A plan to tear down my farmhouse, build a glass and steel resort, and commercialize every inch of my land. He called it progress. I called it desecration. It's just a simple transfer, he said smoothly, sliding a pen toward me. It'll protect you from inheritance taxes. Think of it as securing Clara's future. He always used her name when he wanted something. I didn't even look at the papers. My answer is no. Marcus, I said. He didn't expect that. For a moment, the charm dropped, and I saw what he truly was. Then he smiled again, his voice low and cold. We'll talk after the ceremony. You'll have time to think about your daughter's future. That's when I knew the wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a battlefield. The reception was everything Marcus had promised Clara it would be. Chandeliers, roses, soft music, and 200 smiling guests. Clara looked beautiful, glowing with love. But all I saw was the man beside her, the mask he wore so well. I sat quietly, watching the crowd, feeling the weight of the morning's confrontation. Then came the clinking of a champagne flute. Marcus stood, microphone in hand, the room falling silent. He spoke beautifully about Clara, his light, his future. The guests sighed in admiration, and then his eyes found me. "I want to thank my incredible father-in-law, Sam," he said, "a man who built a legacy with his own two hands. And tonight, he'll ensure the future of that legacy by giving us the keys to Isabel's vineyard." Applause erupted. They thought it was a touching gesture, a father's blessing. But to me, it was a public execution. I looked at Clara. She was crying tears of joy. She believed his lie. That was the worst part. As the applause faded, Marcus made his way toward me, smiling for the cameras. He leaned down, his words hissing beneath the music. "The keys, Sam. Don't ruin her perfect day." I looked past him to my daughter's trusting face, then back at the man she'd married. "No," I said quietly. His smile faltered. The mask slipped. "Don't be a sentimental old fool," he growled. "Everyone's watching. Give them to me." "No," I repeated, and then his hand moved. A sharp crack echoed through the room. The music stopped. The chandeliers swayed. He had slapped me. A camera flashed, capturing my humiliation forever. Clara screamed my name, tears spilling down her face. I rose slowly. My cheek burned, but I didn't touch it. I looked at her one last time. My daughter, my world, her illusion shattered. I straightened my jacket, turned, and walked out through the silent crowd. No words. No revenge yet. Just a promise. Because Marcus had just planted the seed of his own downfall, that he was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his anger. His hand gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles pale, jaw locked. "You can't do this to me, Sam." His voice cracked through the quiet office, echoing off the wooden beams Isabel and I once polished together. The same beams that had heard laughter, not this venom. I didn't flinch. I simply looked up from the ledger I was signing and met his eyes. "Actually," I said softly, "I already did." He blinked, confusion flickering before rage took over again. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this." I stood, slow and deliberate, feeling every ounce of the years between us. His youth burning like a wildfire, mine steady like embers that never die. "Marcus," I said, my tone calm but sharp as a blade, "you've spent your entire life underestimating quiet men. That's your mistake, not mine." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I continued before he could. You think the world owes you. You think charm is currency. But this land, this legacy, was never yours to sell. Isabel and I built it with our hands, not with schemes. He slammed his fist on the desk. The old oak rattled, but didn't break, just like me. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my wife, in front of everyone? I'll destroy you." A bitter smile touched my lips. "You already tried that. In public, remember?" His face flushed crimson. For a split second, I saw something flicker behind his fury. Fear? "You don't have the money. You don't have the influence," he spat. "I'll take it from you one way or another." I stepped closer, the air between us heavy as a storm about to break. "You've already lost, Marcus. You just don't know it yet." He frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" I reached into the drawer and placed a small black USB drive on the desk between us. The same one Isabel left me, the one he never knew existed. "It means your time here is over. And when you walk out that door, don't ever come back." He hesitated, eyes darting from me to the USB, trying to read what it meant. Then he laughed, hollow and desperate. "You're bluffing." "No," I said quietly. "I'm remembering." I sat back down and opened my ledger again, the sound of paper filling the silence he couldn't bear. He turned toward the door, muttering curses under his breath, his arrogance crumbling into panic. And just before he stepped out, I said one last thing, without looking up. "You'll understand soon enough. The vines always remember who tends them and who poisons them." The door slammed. For the first time in months, the office was still. I let out a slow breath, staring at the USB resting in my palm. The cool metal felt heavier than it should have. That was when I heard her voice again, Isabel's, soft, calm, certain. "It's time, Sam." It was weaker than I remembered, strained by illness, but still steel. "Marcus, the big picture is the one you see from the front porch, not the one on a banker's spreadsheet. The farm isn't an asset. It's our home. The answer is no. And I'd ask you not to bring this up again behind my husband's back." The recording ended. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words. I clicked it off and leaned back in my chair. For items lay before me in the lamplight: a ledger of his debts, a drive filled with his desperation, a mysterious agreement with an old friend, and that recording of his betrayal. This wasn't a box of memories. It was a box of evidence, a box of ammunition. Isabel hadn't just been tending her garden in her final years. She had been sharpening a sword. She'd been fighting a quiet war to protect me, protecting our legacy even as her body failed her. Grief washed through me, deep and relentless, but for the first time since the wedding, it was joined by something new, a cold, clear sense of direction. I knew what I had to do. I was not just a farmer anymore. I was the executor of my wife's final will. Just as dawn broke and the first golden light crept over the hills, I saw the headlights of David Chen's car winding up the gravel driveway. He stepped out with a briefcase in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. A man of habit, steady, deliberate, reliable. Exactly who I needed. He entered without knocking. His eyes found the dark bruise on my cheek. He didn't say, "I told you so," or ask if I was all right. He didn't have to. His silence said it all: quiet anger, fierce loyalty. Then his gaze moved to the desk, to the items laid out like puzzle pieces under the lamp. "So," he said, his voice low and heavy, "this is Isabel's last will and testament." He poured me a cup of coffee without asking, and for a moment we just sat there, two old friends in the stillness of a new morning preparing for war. David picked up the ledger first, flipping through its pages with surgical precision. $75,000, he murmured, shaking his head. Clear pattern of financial dependency and manipulation. Ugly, but not illegal. Next, he slid the USB drive into his laptop. As he scrolled through the files, his expression hardened. "But this is different," he said quietly. The screen displayed a web of debts, failed stock gambles, loans taken against assets Marcus didn't even own. "This is motive, Sam. Pure motive." He wasn't just trying to take the farm. He needed it. Without it, his empire collapses. He looked at Isabel's note marked financial review. "She was brilliant," he said softly. "Absolutely brilliant." Then he picked up a small recorder, pressed play, and listened. We heard Marcus's smooth, patronizing tone, and Isabel's frail but unbreakable voice cutting through it like a blade. When the recording ended, David closed his eyes for a moment. "Character," he whispered. "That recording proves intent, deceit, everything." Finally, he turned to the last item, a thick manila envelope, sealed in wax. "What's this?" he asked. "I was waiting for you," I said. He took a small knife from his briefcase, cut the seal with the precision of a surgeon, and unfolded the blue-covered document inside. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. I watched the disbelief on his face turn into awe. He leaned back, a low whistle escaping his lips. "My God, Sam," he said, smiling in pure admiration. Isabel was a genius. He tapped the document. "Listen carefully. What your wife did here is one of the most brilliant pieces of legal chess I've ever seen." He took a sip of coffee, then began. 5 years ago, Isabel caught wind that Tanaka Holdings was buying up farmland around the lake. Not for condos, for an eco-agricultural preserve built around sustainable vineyards. Most people sold out. But Isabel, she didn't want to sell. She wanted a partnership. He turned the document around. There it was, Isabel's signature beside Kenji Tanaka's. She negotiated a deal, David said, his voice electric. Her vineyard was to be the centerpiece of the entire Tanaka Greenbelt project. But that's not the genius part. He pointed to a clause buried deep in the text. This is the masterpiece. A first right of refusal clause with a poison pill. He looked up, eyes shining. It means Tanaka Holdings has the exclusive right to purchase the farm at a pre-agreed, generous price. If you decide to sell it, or if ownership ever transfers to someone outside the Vance family without Tanaka's written consent. I felt the weight of his words settle like thunder. In other words, he said, leaning forward, if Marcus had succeeded, if you'd signed those papers, the deed's transfer would have triggered this clause. He wouldn't get the vineyard, or his resort, or his fortune. The moment he touched it, the property would have gone straight to Tanaka Holdings. Isabel planted a legal time bomb right under his feet. I stared at her signature. She had seen it all coming, his greed, his desperation, his final play. She hadn't left me a shield. She left me a sword. A calm clarity replaced my grief. The path forward was no longer uncertain. It was lit by the brilliance of the woman I had loved for 40 years. The time for waiting is over, I said quietly. Arrange the meeting. As the sun rose higher, the document lay between us. A treaty at the end of a war only one side knew had been fought. David spent the next hour on the phone, verifying every clause, every signature, every county record. Isabel had left no loopholes. When he was done, he looked up. It's all in place. The agreement is active. They can't touch the farm. I shook my head. We're not waiting, David. Isabel waited. I waited. No more. She left us a weapon, and I intend to use it. He smiled faintly. What do you have in mind? Make the call, I said. Let Tanaka know I'm aware of the agreement. Tell them there's been a fraudulent attempt to seize control of the primary asset in their project. No threats, just facts. Then we'll see how fast the dominoes fall. David nodded, dialed a number from memory, and spoke calmly into the phone. This is David Chun, representing Samuel Vance of Isabel's Vineyard. We wish to reaffirm our partnership under the Tanaka Green Belt Agreement and report an attempted hostile takeover by a Mr. Marcus Thorne. It was short, professional, and devastating. Neither of us knew that simple phone call would send a ripple across the world. A ripple that would soon become a tsunami, one heading straight for a small island in the middle of the Pacific. I can see it clearly even now. Marcus in Bora Bora, the turquoise water beneath his bungalow, the illusion of peace all around him. He was deep in his apology act, charming Clara back into his web. It was the pressure, Clara, the stress, the wedding, the deals. I lost myself. His voice soft, his hands clasping hers, every word rehearsed. And then a ping. A single notification that cracked paradise in half. He looked down, irritated, until he saw the subject line. Urgent. Project Helios funding suspended. His smile vanished. His fingers trembled as he opened the message. His primary investor, the source of 90% of his capital, had just pulled out, citing instability in local asset holdings. Effective immediately, funding was frozen. Before he could even process it, another ping. Subject: Emergency Board Summons, Tanaka Holdings. A second message. This one from the very company he owed millions. He was being summoned to New York within 48 hours to answer for material breaches of fiduciary duty. The first email was the fire alarm. The second made it clear the fire department wasn't coming. He looked up from his phone, his face pale, paradise fading around him. What's wrong? Clara asked. We have to go, he stammered. We have to go back. Now. The honeymoon was over. He packed in silence, fled the island, and boarded the first flight home, running not from guilt, but from consequences. Back in my office, David and I poured another cup of coffee. We didn't yet know the details, but we knew the trap had sprung. The first domino had fallen, and the wolf was running straight into the snare. When our plane touched down in New York, the plan was already in motion. I was a farmer heading into a world built on marble and lies. But for the first time, I wasn't the one who felt small. Tanaka Holdings headquarters stood like a blade of glass against the sky. The 50th floor was silent, pristine, a cathedral of quiet power. When the doors opened, I saw him, Kenji Tanaka. His hair silver now, his presence unchanged. He turned, saw me, and smiled softly. Samuel, he said, it has been too long. Kenji, I replied. Thank you for seeing us. He gestured for us to sit. Tea was served, and then we waited. 15 minutes later, the door opened. Marcus walked in, or rather, stumbled in. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his face pale from sleepless panic. The confident swagger was gone. He looked like a man who'd seen his empire collapse overnight. "Sorry I'm late, gentlemen. The flight was." He froze. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the man seated beside Mr. Tanaka. Me. The shock hit him like a live wire. The color drained from his face. There I sat, the old farmer he'd humiliated, calmly sipping tea beside the man who now owned his future. In that instant, Marcus Thorne finally understood. The world he'd built on lies had collapsed, and Isabel's hand was still guiding the fall that he opened and closed his mouth a few times, like a fish gasping for air. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a trembling whisper. "Mr. Tanaka." "Sam, what is this?" His eyes darted between Tanaka's calm expression and my steady gaze, searching for a mistake, a way out. He looked like a trapped animal realizing the cage was closing in. Mr. Tanaka didn't answer. He didn't even grant Marcus the dignity of eye contact. Instead, he took a slow sip of his tea, eyes fixed on the skyline beyond the window. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he gestured toward David Chun, seated quietly with his briefcase resting on the table. The meaning was clear. Marcus was no longer important enough to deserve a direct word. "My lawyer," Mr. Tanaka said simply. David stood, moving with calm precision, the quiet center of the storm about to break. He opened his briefcase and began placing items on the table, one by one. First came the small, worn black ledger. It looked insignificant against the polished granite surface, but in that moment, it held the weight of truth. "Mr. Thorne," David began, his tone even and clear. "Let's start with the small things." He opened the ledger. "This is a record kept by the late Mrs. Isabel Vance, documenting personal loans made to you over the past 3 years. The total, which remains unpaid, is $75,000. Marcus forced a weak laugh, waving a dismissive hand. "That was a family misunderstanding. Gifts, really." David didn't acknowledge him. He simply moved to the next item, a silver USB drive. He plugged it in, and the large screen behind Mr. Tanaka flickered to life. Rows of red numbers filled the display. Negative balances, unpaid loans, losses stacked on losses. "And this," David continued, his voice rising slightly, "is the reason for your urgency. These are your financial records, a portfolio built on high-risk debt and catastrophic investment losses." He used a laser pointer to circle a number. "You're 3 days away from default." David turned back to him. "This is the evidence of your desperation, Mr. Thorne. The reason you needed an asset to leverage. A farm, for instance." Marcus's face drained of color. Sweat traced a line down his temple. He stammered something about market volatility, but David was already placing the next item on the table, a small digital recorder. "Now," he said quietly, "a matter of character." He pressed play. Marcus's own voice filled the room. Smooth, condescending, confident. "Isabel, please be reasonable. Think of it as unlocking the value of your assets. Sam's a good farmer, but he's too sentimental to see the big picture." Then came Isabel's voice. Weak, but unbreakable. "Marcus, the big picture is the one you see from the front porch, not the one on a banker's spreadsheet. The farm isn't an asset. It's our home." The answer is no. The recording clicked off. Silence followed, deep, absolute, and suffocating. Marcus shrank in his chair, his face blotchy red. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't look at anyone. After a long pause, David spoke again. "All of this," he said, gesturing toward the evidence, "shows deceit, manipulation, and profound disrespect. But this..." The screen changed again. "This is illegal." Displayed in clear, official text was the partnership agreement between Isabel Vance and Tanaka Holdings. "This contract," David said firmly, "was signed 5 years ago. Every attempt you made to seize control of that farm constitutes a deliberate and fraudulent interference with a binding economic agreement. That is a crime." For the first time, Mr. Tanaka spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but commanded the room. "Mr. Thorne," he said slowly. Do you know why Mrs. Vance came to me all those years ago? Marcus, now completely broken, shook his head. It was because 20 years ago, Tanaka continued, his gaze shifting to me, when my company was nothing more than a dream, I was denied every loan. The bank said I was too much of a risk, but one man, a farmer who barely knew me, believed in me. He co-signed my first loan and secured it with 10 acres of his own land. That man was Samuel Vance. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that carries truth, heavy, undeniable, final. Marcus's jaw hung open. He finally understood he hadn't walked into a business meeting. He had walked into judgment. Mr. Tanaka's voice grew colder. Mrs. Vance didn't come to me to trap you. She came to protect the man who once saved my life's work. This agreement wasn't about profit. It was a vow between two people who understood loyalty. He rose from his chair, a figure of quiet power. You try to steal the legacy of a woman I hold in the highest esteem, he said, his voice low but sharp as steel. And you laid hands on a man I owe everything to. He looked at Marcus one final time, eyes filled with quiet contempt. Tanaka Holdings is acquiring all your outstanding debt, effective immediately. Every asset you own is now frozen. Your employment with this organization and its partners is terminated. Our legal team will contact you and the district attorney regarding your attempted fraud. Marcus made a choking sound. He didn't plead. He didn't fight. He just collapsed. The arrogance was gone. The empire was gone. All that remained was a man hollowed out by his own greed. He finally understood. He hadn't challenged a farmer. He had angered a silent giant. The days that followed were quiet. The storm had passed. The lightning had struck. And what remained was peace, clean and still. David handled the legal aftermath in the city, dismantling Marcus's empire piece by piece. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. It was over. I returned to the rhythm of the land, pruning vines, clearing weeds, tending to new shoots. The work was delicate, healing. It reminded me that tending the future always begins with repairing the past. 2 weeks later, a car came up the driveway. Not David's, Clara's. It moved slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure of its welcome. She sat inside for a long time before stepping out. She looked fragile, her once polished city clothes hanging loosely on her frame, like a costume from a life that no longer fit. She spotted me in the field and walked toward me, her shoes sinking into the soft soil. She stopped a few feet away, twisting the strap of her purse. "Dad," she whispered. That single word broke something inside me. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry. Quiet at first, then deep, uncontrollable sobs. She stumbled forward, and I met her halfway, wrapping my arms around her. She felt small, fragile, the way she had when she was a little girl with a scraped knee. "I was so blind," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have seen it. I should have listened. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say it's okay. It wasn't. Wounds like that take time to heal." I just held her until the sobs faded. Then I wiped a tear from her cheek and went to the tool shed. When I returned, I held a pair of gloves, Isabel's old gloves, small but sturdy. "The soil always forgives, Clara," I said softly. "It doesn't care about last season's mistakes, the droughts or the frost. It only cares about what you're willing to plant today." She took the gloves, her fingers tracing the worn leather. And in her eyes, for the first time in years, I saw hope. "We start again," I said. "Right here, together." 6 months passed, a lifetime and a single breath all at once. Autumn painted the hillsides in gold and crimson. The vines hung heavy with grapes, ripe from a season of healing. The farm was alive again, humming with quiet purpose. A new sign now stood at the entrance, carved from a fallen oak tree. The Isabel and Samuel Vance Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, in partnership with Tanaka Holdings. It wasn't just a sign. It was a promise to honor the past by protecting the future. Clara had found her place, not in a city high-rise, but in the soil of her own home. I often watched her leading groups of students through the vineyards, explaining the science of the harvest with confidence and grace. The designer clothes were gone. The boots were muddy. And for the first time, she looked truly herself, strong, grounded, alive. That afternoon, Kenji Tanaka arrived, not for business, but as a friend. We walked together through the rows of vines, the sun dipping low behind the lake. At the top of the hill, we stopped by the spot where Isabel and I had carved our initials decades ago. I opened a bottle, our newest vintage, the first Clara had overseen, and poured 2 glasses. The air was cool, the wine rich with oak and cherry. Kenji raised his glass. To Isabel, he said softly. I lifted mine to meet his. To the things that last, I replied. The glasses chimed gently. The sound lingered in the quiet air, like a promise kept. As I watched Clara laughing among the vines, I realized something profound. The legacy wasn't in land or wealth or revenge. It was in her, in the healing, in the quiet rebuilding of what mattered most. That day, I understood true strength isn't loud. It doesn't shout, threaten, or demand. It endures. It builds. It forgives.